Some disappearances fade into legend, others rot in silence beneath centuries of sand. In 2011, American cartographer Thomas Vail vanished during a routine geological survey in the Sahara Desert. No distress call, no wreckage, just heat, silence, and an unrelenting wind that erases even footprints. 14 years later, a lone geologist on an academic mapping expedition brushes away centuries of dust and finds something that should have stayed buried. A sun-bleached skeleton, a rusted compass, and a scorched military-grade dog tag. The name on it? Thomas Vail. But what they'll discover next suggests he didn't die alone. The heat didn't just shimmer, it howled. A low, ghostly hum that rose from the cracked ribs of the earth and curled around Owen Maddox's neck like breath from the grave. He wiped the sweat from his goggles with the back of his glove and squinted toward the crest of the dune. Something caught the light. Pale, off-white, smooth where everything else was jagged. Bone. He stepped closer, knees sinking into loose granules of dust that hadn't seen rain in decades. The Sahara didn't give up its secrets. It swallowed them whole. But today, it spat something back. The bleached curve of a skull broke through the surface like the crown of a buried god. Partially exposed ribs fanned out beneath a tattered fragment of what looked like desert camo. A military pack lay nearby, half devoured by sand. The wind shifted, and a metal tag clinked faintly against the bone. Owen crouched, adrenaline thudding behind his eyes. He pried the tag free. Vail, Thomas R. ID 4312-9910 U.S. Civilian GEO Unit. He stared at it for a long moment, chest tight. The name was familiar, not from personal memory, but from myth. The cartographer who vanished, they'd called him. Field stories whispered at conferences and scribbled in the margins of dusty journals. A man who stepped into the desert and never came back. 14 years. Owen looked out over the barren horizon. It stretched forever in every direction, like an open throat waiting to swallow the next secret. Behind him, his assistant was calling out, but the words didn't register. All Owen could hear was the wind, curling around the bones, and something else, a thought so loud it felt spoken. He didn't die here by accident. The bones had a name now. Confirmed by dental records, DNA, and a weathered set of field notes preserved in a vacuum-sealed pouch deep in the military pack. The remains belonged to Thomas Vail, an American civilian contracted by a French EU mineral initiative. Last seen alive in March 2011. Official cause of death: undetermined exposure. Owen Maddox read the coroner's statement 3 times, fingers trembling slightly over the PDF printout. Undetermined. That word scratched something in him, something raw and unresolved. 14 years. 14 years the Sahara had hidden him like a rumor buried in salt. Back in Algiers, Owen sat in the hotel room's dim light, ignoring the flicker of the ceiling fan and the steady hum of the news channel. Vail's name was already trending in obscure scientific circles and online conspiracy forums. Desert ghost found, cartographer of the dead. But Owen wasn't interested in headlines. He was reading Vail's last journal entry, the one found zipped into the inside lining of the weather-worn pack. March 18, 2011. I think I found something. Not on the map. Not any map. The coordinates don't make sense, but I followed them anyway. Something's wrong with the land. It hums, like it's remembering. That was it. No signature, no location, no closure. Owen leaned back, staring at the ceiling. He tried to convince himself that this wasn't personal, that he was just a geologist finishing a dig. But in truth, something had embedded itself in him the moment he saw that skull, a presence lingering behind the facts. Why had Vale ventured off course? Why was his final journal page intentionally hidden? And most of all, what was this place he referenced? A place not marked by any known coordinates? Owen closed his laptop, heartbeat uneven. This wasn't just a discovery, it was an invitation, and he couldn't stop thinking about it. The old Tuareg's eyes were the color of iron scorched in fire. He sat cross-legged beneath a canvas awning at the edge of the Tamanrasset marketplace, draped in indigo robes stained with years of dust. His hands, leathered and deliberate, moved slowly as he poured bitter tea into a cracked ceramic cup. He spoke only when the translator stopped fumbling. "No bones at first," the nomad said. "No body, just a man, alone." Owen leaned in. "You're sure?" The translator repeated the question. The old man nodded once, deliberately. "It was the summer of the great heat," he said, "near the western dunes past Insala. Our caravan came across him at dusk, a white man, face burned red like clay, clothes torn, feet bloody. No camel, no pack. Did he speak?" Owen asked, trying to keep his voice from shaking. The nomad's eyes didn't blink. "He asked for water, but not like a man who is dying, like one who forgets what water is." Owen swallowed. "What did he say?" The nomad tapped the side of his head. "He said the desert had taken his name, that he was walking home to a place that had never been built." Silence settled over them, heavy as the heat. A nearby generator sputtered. A goat bleated in the background. "Do you remember when this was?" Owen pressed. "What year?" The old man closed his eyes. 4, maybe 5 years after the Americans stopped looking, he said. Owen froze. That would have been 2015, 4 years after Vale was presumed dead. He stared at the translator, then back at the nomad, who added, "We offered to take him back to Tamanrasset. He refused. Said he had to go where the sky touched the salt." Owen's hand closed slowly around his notebook. That phrase, "where the sky touches the salt," wasn't new. It had appeared once, barely legible in the margins of Vale's journal. Scribbled, repeated, obsessive. The old man poured another cup, then stared at Owen with something halfway between pity and warning. "You think the desert kills quickly," he said, "but it waits, and it listens. Coordinates don't lie, but people do, and the earth forgets." The numbers were scratched into the back page of Vale's last field map, barely visible beneath layers of graphite smudges and water damage. A string of latitude and longitude that didn't match any official grid. Not a well, not a village, not even a geological marker. Owen input them into his satellite GPS. The blinking cursor hovered over nothing. A blank stretch of Sahara near the Erg Mehejibat Basin. Sand for hundreds of miles. No roads, no ruins. Just heat, wind, and time. He rented a 4x4, packed water, solar chargers, and set out alone. It took him 2 days. The last 12 miles were too soft for tires, so he walked. The dunes hissed like they were breathing. With each step, he felt a growing sense of dislocation, like the horizon moved as he moved, like the land watched. Then he saw it, a shape breaking the monotony of tan, a collapsed mound, partly buried in drift. Not natural, not weathered. The corner of a man-made structure protruding at a sharp angle from the sand. Concrete or stone, he couldn't tell. Near it, half buried beneath a fractured limestone slab, he spotted a cloth satchel. Owen dropped to his knees and pulled it free. Inside were 2 moleskin notebooks, brittle with age but miraculously preserved. The name inside, T. Vale. He opened the first one. Ink smeared, pages warped, but some sketches remained. Technical, obsessed. On one page, a cross-section drawing of what looked like a buried installation, spiral stairs descending into a chamber beneath bedrock. It was labeled subsurface structure, ancient. Next to it, a single note, not colonial, not military. Prehistoric? Purpose unclear. Emits a vibration? Owen's hand hovered over the page, breath caught. A vibration. He looked up. The dunes swayed slightly in the wind, but now, beneath the hiss of sand, he thought he could feel it too. Not sound, not wind. A low internal hum, almost below hearing. The same thing Vale wrote about 14 years ago. Owen stood, heart hammering, suddenly aware of the stillness. The GPS blinked again, and then froze. The screen read, "Location not found. March 2011, Southern Algeria, French Energy Consortium Field Base." Thomas Vale squinted into the hard desert light, boots crunching against gravel as the sun peeled layers of sweat from his back. The makeshift base was a clutter of satellite dishes, data trailers, and muttering scientists trying to pretend they weren't lost. Behind it all, the desert stretched on, flat, burning, infinite. "You're late," a man barked in French-accented English. Vale looked up to see Léon Mercier, expedition lead, clipboard in hand, expression taut. "Plane was grounded in Paris," Vale replied coolly. "Dust storm." Mercier didn't smile. "No one cares. We paid you for precision, not excuses." Vale didn't flinch. He'd worked in worse places, for colder men. He was here on contract, one of 3 civilian cartographers hired to chart seismic anomalies discovered during a failed drilling operation. The terrain didn't match the satellite models. Subsurface mapping showed inexplicable geometric formations, unnaturally symmetrical beneath meters of sediment. Officially, oil or uranium speculation. Unofficially, Vale wasn't sure, and that made it interesting. As he unpacked his equipment, one of the local Tuareg guides, a wiry man named Idris, watched him silently. Vale nodded, offering a polite smile. The guide didn't return it. Instead, he muttered something in Tamashek under his breath and spit into the sand. "What's his problem?" Vale asked another tech. "He says the land out here doesn't like to be measured," the tech said with a shrug. "Old superstitions." That night, Vale reviewed satellite overlays by headlamp. Something tugged at the edges of the topography, lines that formed no natural pattern, circles half buried in grid formations, like foundations or symbols. There was one coordinate cluster that kept flickering out when overlaid on digital maps, like the GPS refused to acknowledge it. Vale stared at it until his eyes blurred. The hum of the desert seeped through the canvas walls of his tent. There was nothing to hear, but something felt like it was listening. He clicked his pen, jotted a note in the margin. "Test these. Something under the dunes, like it's buried on purpose." He paused. Then below that, "Why does the sand feel heavier here?" The wind hit like a freight train. No warning, no time. One moment, Vale was crouched over his equipment, fine-tuning LiDAR settings near the ridge. The next, the sky disappeared. A howl rose from behind the dunes, the air thickening like syrup as the desert spun into chaos. "Storm!" someone shouted from the far slope. Vale turned, too late. The sand came in sheets, horizontal and stinging. His goggles fogged. The sky went orange, then black. The sun vanished behind a wall of dust. He clutched his pack and sprinted toward the cluster of trucks. Visibility. 5 feet, maybe less. A shadow darted past. A voice screamed. A name? But the wind twisted it into something inhuman. He tripped, fell hard, rolled through sand that bit like glass. When he stood, the trucks were gone. The entire camp was gone. "Mercier," he shouted, coughing. "Idris." No response. Just wind, like a voice trying to speak but never finishing the word. He activated his GPS. No signal. The coordinates blinked. Error. His radio spat static. Compass spun. North meant nothing now. A dune shifted beside him, not drifted, shifted, as if moved from beneath. Vale froze. The storm howled louder, but beneath it, something else. A pulse, like a low-frequency tremor deep below the crust. He could feel it in his molars. He ran. Blinded, choking, he stumbled downhill. His boot hit something hard. Stone, buried in sand, smooth and round like the edge of a submerged dome. He reached out. The surface was warm, not from the sun, from within. Vale jerked his hand away. Then silence, sudden, eerie. The wind dropped in an instant like it had never come. He looked around. The sky was clear again. The camp? Gone. No tire tracks, no footprints, just a single fluttering tarp half-buried 50 meters away. He was alone, not lost, abandoned. He turned back toward the object he'd touched. It was already gone, completely covered again, as if the storm had come just to hide it. Vale sank to his knees, heart pounding. This wasn't just a storm, it was a warning. He should have seen it hours before he did. The desert plays tricks with light. Distance folds into itself, horizons bend, and heat dances on the skin of the earth like a mirage. So when Thomas Vale spotted the outpost at dusk, framed by two ancient wind-carved monoliths, he assumed it was another optical lie. But it didn't shimmer. It stood still. A small station, square and metallic, half sunk into the sand, partially shaded by a rock overhang. Faded Cyrillic lettering was scorched across the side. Stanция 43, Station 43. Russian? He approached slowly, warily. The station bore signs of age, peeling paint, cracked solar panels, but something about it felt wrong, not derelict, not untouched, recently disturbed. The wind had shifted the sand just enough to reveal a trail, footprints, clear and deliberate, leading to the door. Not his, not old. Someone had been here. Vale called out. No answer. He pushed the rusted door open with a metallic groan. Inside, the air was stale and dry, like an abandoned submarine, but it wasn't empty. A cot, a half-melted candle, scattered notebooks, all in Russian, a radio, antenna jury-rigged from wire and bone, a tin can, still half full of beans. The station hadn't been used in years, but someone had eaten here last week. He stepped inside, heart hammering, scanned the walls. Most of the writing was nonsense, scrawled numbers, codes, a map with dozens of X's scratched into the desert like warning signs. But one message had been carved into the metal wall with a knife, not written. We followed the hum too far. They do not sleep below. Vale backed out slowly, suddenly aware of how dark it was outside. The sun had slipped below the rocks. He turned. The footprints leading into the station? They were gone. Wiped clean. The wind hadn't changed. No one else had passed. And still, Vale felt it. The distinct sensation that someone, somewhere in the dunes beyond, was watching. Not following. Not helping. Waiting. The dunes, flattened near what the old Russian map labeled Le Lac Salé, the Salt Lake. But there was no lake, just cracked earth and white crust stretching like the floor of a cathedral abandoned to heat. Vale stood at its edge, breath shallow. The wind had died, no insects, no birds, just a vast, sterile stillness. Then he saw it, half buried in the salt crust, a stone disk, about the size of a dinner plate, intricately carved and perfectly centered. Its surface shimmered faintly in the noon glare. He knelt beside it, brushed off a layer of silt, and froze. The engraving was unmistakable, a Sufi swirl, ancient and sacred. But this one was inverted, its spiral turned inward, not out, like a whirlpool collapsing, not expanding. He'd seen similar symbols etched into cave walls near Tagit, used in pre-Islamic spiritual traditions. But this wasn't history. It was a message, or a warning. He lifted it, and the hum returned. Stronger, not in the ears, in the bones. He dropped the disc, gasping, hand numb. His shadow twisted briefly in the wrong direction, curling toward the center of the spiral. And then, movement. A figure stood at the edge of the flat, where salt met sand. White robes, bare feet, stillness like a statue. A woman. He blinked. She was closer. No footprints, no sound. She stood not 20 feet from him, head slightly tilted, skin pale beneath the sun, eyes like burnt silver. Her mouth moved but made no sound. He staggered backward. "Who are you?" he rasped. She raised her hand slowly, index finger extended, and pointed to the spiral on the ground, then vanished. No fade, no dissolve, just gone. Vale stood alone again, chest rising and falling like he'd just surfaced from deep water. Sweat froze on his back despite the heat. His skin crawled. He turned in a circle. No trace, just salt and heat. But now he knew two things. He was being watched. He was not the first to see her, and for the first time, he felt it. Not fear, but awe. Something beneath the desert was alive. Owen Maddox didn't hear most of what his department chair said. Words like sabbatical, career suicide, and field boundaries flew past his ears like insects at dusk. He nodded, signed the resignation form, and walked out with nothing but a duffel and a drive full of encrypted GPS data. It wasn't a decision. It was a need. The Vale case had wrapped around his brain like wire. He flew to Niceville, Florida, the last known home of Elise Vale, Thomas's younger sister. The house was quiet, coastal, trimmed in wind-worn paint and hollowed by years of waiting. Elise met him at the door. Her face was thinner than in the photos. Hope had long since dried into habit. "You're not the first to come looking," she said softly, "but you're the first one who didn't have a badge or a microphone." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the clock ticking and the occasional cry of gulls. When Owen showed her the journal fragment, she didn't cry. She disappeared for a few minutes. When she returned, she carried a wooden keepsake box. She opened it slowly, revealing a letter inside a sealed Ziploc bag. "It came a month after he went missing," Elise said. "No return address. Postmark Morocco." Owen's throat tightened. The handwriting was unmistakable, shaky but Thomas Vale's. She slid it toward him. "I never opened it. Thought it would close something I wasn't ready to let go of." Owen carefully unsealed it, his fingers trembling. The paper inside was yellowed, the ink smudged but legible. "Elise, I'm not dead. Not yet. But I've gone somewhere the maps don't reach. I don't know what I've found, but I can't leave it. It's not just science. It's older than belief. If anyone comes asking, don't stop them. Tell them to listen for the hum." Tea. Owen sat back, hands shaking. This wasn't just about finding Vale anymore. It was about understanding why he stayed. And now, Owen knew one thing. Thomas Vale hadn't vanished. He had followed something. They sat on the back porch, evening light bleeding orange across the seagrass. Elise held a cup of tea that had long since gone cold, her hands wrapped tightly around it like it was the only thing tethering her to the moment. "I never told anyone," she said finally. "Not the police, not the search team. I thought I imagined it for years." Owen didn't speak. He let the silence hold her words like glass. "It was 6 months after they called off the search. I was here alone. It was past midnight. The phone rang." She stared straight ahead. "I knew it was him the second I answered. Not because he said my name, he didn't. But the way he breathed. I grew up with that breath. The way he sounded when he was scared, but didn't want me to know." "What did he say?" Owen asked gently. She took a long breath. "He said, Don't let them dig. Just that. Nothing else. I said his name, over and over, but he didn't respond. She shook her head, her voice cracking. And the way he said it, Owen, it didn't sound like my brother. It sounded like someone wearing his voice, like he was underwater or dreaming. Owen leaned forward. Did he call again? No. Her eyes welled, but she didn't wipe them. I checked the caller ID. Just static, not even a number. I tried to record the message, but it was gone before I could play it back, like the phone had imagined it too. She finally turned to face him. I didn't want to believe he was alive, because if he was, then what kind of place would keep him from coming home? Owen didn't have an answer, but something inside him shifted, like a puzzle piece turning in his gut. This wasn't just science. It wasn't just madness. Something, or someone, had reached out of the desert once before, not just to be found, but to warn. And if that call was real, then Thomas Vale hadn't disappeared by accident. He was trying to stay buried. The cave was barely wide enough for a man to crawl through. Owen had followed a faint trail of foot-scuffed sand behind the ruins near the outcrop. The entrance was low and choked with wind-blown dust, but the stone arch above it bore markings, not natural. Something like concentric circles, deeply gouged. Inside, it was cooler, still, dead. The beam of his headlamp cut across stone and shadow. Then he saw it, etched writing, not in paint or ink, but scraped into the wall by a knife or shard of metal. Journal entries, dozens of them. The handwriting was jagged but unmistakable. Thomas Vale's. Day 27. Equipment dead. No signal. I saw the spiral again, this time in the clouds. Owen ran his fingers across the stone, feeling the desperation carved into each word. Day 31. There's a rhythm to the silence. It comes from below, beneath the strata. The rocks sing at night. He kept reading, the entries stretching across 3 separate panels of the cavern wall, like a mind unraveling in real time. Day 40. I am not alone. Then, day 42. The spiral turned. Everything reversed. Time is sideways here. The shift was gradual but clear. From rational geologist notes to fragments of thought, poetic, broken. The sand forgets, but the stone remembers. I am the echo now. The hum is inside me. Owen stepped back, swallowing the lump rising in his throat. These weren't just field notes. They were confessions, warnings, one man's mind, carved into eternity. At the farthest end of the ledger, almost hidden in a dark recess, one final line was scratched so deep it had chipped the rock. Don't let them dig. The same words Elise had heard on the phone. Owen leaned against the cave wall, his heartbeat pounding like distant drums. He felt it now. Not just fear, but connection. He wasn't reading Vale's mind. He was slipping into it. And somewhere beneath all of this, a thought whispered, what if Vale didn't go mad? What if madness was just the only way to understand? The Tuareg linguist sat cross-legged in the dust, the sketchbook open on his lap like scripture. His name was Safik, and he had agreed to meet Owen only after 3 separate intermediaries had vouched for him. He didn't touch the pages for a long time, just stared. This symbol, Safik said finally, tapping one of Vale's hand-drawn glyphs, is not a word, it's a story. Owen leaned closer. Go on? In Tamashek, Safik said, we call it Akuran Amanur. It translates roughly as the man without shadow. Owen frowned. Like a ghost? No, Safik said. Worse? He turned the page and pointed to the spiral Vale had drawn beside it, identical to the one Owen had seen at the salt flat. In our myth, there is a man who walks into the desert to find truth. The sun loves him so much, it burns away his shadow. At first, he feels chosen. Blessed Safik's voice dropped. But the longer he stays, the more he forgets who he was. His face fades in mirrors. His voice echoes with delay. Eventually, even the ground stops reflecting him. He becomes something the earth cannot remember. Owen's mouth went dry. What happens to him? He becomes part of the desert, a whisper in storms, a footstep with no source, a presence without past. Safik paused, his gaze drifting toward the window, toward the horizon beyond the dunes. Some say he still walks, alone, not alive, not dead, just waiting. Owen closed the sketchbook gently. The image of Vale's final journal line, "Don't let them dig," rang louder in his skull now, charged with something ancient. This wasn't just madness. Vale had documented a myth from inside the myth, drawn the symbols before he could have known what they meant. Unless he'd seen it himself, or worse, become it. As Owen left the village, sun burning low behind him, he noticed something strange. His own shadow stretched long and dark across the sand. But for one heartbeat, just one, he swore it didn't move when he did. The heat twisted the horizon until it looked like waves. Thomas Vale had stopped checking his compass 2 days ago. It spun constantly now, an eye that refused to blink. North had no meaning. Only her. She always appeared near salt. Crusts on the earth, veins in rock walls, circles on dried clay flats. Wrapped in a white veil, her face obscured except for the gleam of pale eyes and skin that refused the sun. She never spoke. She only walked, and he followed. Each time she appeared, he felt a flicker of something precious. Hope. Not the scientific kind, not the rational, explainable kind. This was old hope, desperate hope, the sort that ruins men. She led him through a canyon Vale was certain hadn't existed a day ago, its walls slick with mineral runoff and etched with more spirals, this time in blood-red ochre. He was losing time. Hours slipped between blinks. Once, he stumbled and scraped his knee. When he stood again, the sun had shifted 4 hours west. "Where are you taking me?" he whispered. She paused just over the next ridge, looking back for the first time. Her veil fluttered in wind that didn't reach him. Her head tilted, not quite curiosity, not quite warning. Then she lifted her hand and pointed, not at him, not beyond, but down, into the canyon floor. There, half buried beneath sand and salt, was a circle of ancient stone, a pit lined with runes, its mouth yawning black as night. Vale's breath caught. He recognized it, not from this world, but from his dreams. Dreams that had started weeks before he found the first spiral. Dreams where the ground pulsed like a heartbeat and whispered his name. He took one step forward. The hum returned, low and steady, like it was waiting. The woman turned and walked into the pit without looking back. Vale followed, not out of fear, not out of madness, but because in that moment he believed something truly dangerous, that this was the only way home. Owen stood before the shattered mirror inside the rusting shell of Station 43, the same place Vale had described, same cave, same salt trail, same carved spiral outside, half buried in the wind-stiffened sand. He wasn't just tracing Thomas Vale's steps anymore. He was living them. His reflection was fragmented, 7 broken pieces spidering across the corroded glass, but each one stared back with a different version of his face, one sweat-soaked, one hollow-eyed, one bleeding at the brow. It hit him hard. He looked like Vale, not physically, but in the set of the eyes, the way the shoulders drooped under unseen weight, in the haunted stretch of skin around his mouth, always half preparing to say something that couldn't be said. He reached out to touch the mirror, and for a split second, one fragment didn't move with him. He recoiled, shook his head, blinked it away. The station was too quiet. Even the wind had paused, like the world itself was holding breath. Owen sat heavily on the edge of the cot. He pulled out Vale's cave journal, his copy of it anyway. Pages of desperate words traced by a man who thought he was chasing science, only to discover he'd stepped into a myth with teeth. There was a new entry at the back. He hadn't written it, he was sure. But there it was. Ink still damp. The mirror isn't broken. You are. The spiral just shows the cracks. He dropped the journal like it had burned him, backed away until his shoulders hit the wall, breath shallow, heart thrashing. Had Vale written it before disappearing? Or had Owen written it and forgotten? In the silence, something moved behind the thin aluminum paneling. Not loudly, just enough to suggest presence. He couldn't run. He couldn't stay. Because Owen Maddox, the logical geologist, the man of facts and rock samples, had just realized something terrifying. He wasn't studying a man anymore. He was studying a reflection, and the longer he looked, the less certain he was who was who. It was wrapped in oilcloth, sealed with melted wax, and buried beneath a pile of stones just inside the canyon's throat, where the spirals began to double back on themselves. Owen had nearly missed it. Only the faint glint of rusted steel in the moonlight had given it away. A battered cassette recorder, 1990s model, analog, heavy, still intact. His hands trembled as he cracked it open. A tape was inside, labeled in shaky pencil, Day 47. He clicked play. At first, just static. Then, "This is Vale. Thomas Vale. I don't know what day it is. I don't think time means what it used to mean." Owen froze. The voice was dry, broken, frayed at the edges like cloth rubbed too thin. But it was Vale. Undeniably. The spiral is everywhere now, not just in stone, in the clouds, in the way the sand moves. Sometimes I see it in the skin of my hands. Rustling sounds, wind. Then, panting. I followed her. The woman in white. She led me to the pit again, but this time, there were bones at the edge, human, old. Some still had cloth. One of them had my belt. Owen's breath caught. Vale continued. "I left a message for Elise. I hope she gets it. If you're hearing this, it means you came looking. God help you." A long pause. Then a quiet metallic sound. A blade being drawn or dropped. It's not a place, it's a choice. It shows you what you want, and then it undoes you. More silence. Then, faintly, a hum, not from the tape, but in the room itself. They're coming up from the ground again. They don't have faces this time, just the memory of them. Sudden scrambling, heavy breathing. "If you find this, don't dig, don't follow. She doesn't lead you out, she leads you in." A final breath. Then, the desert remembers, the spiral. The tape cut off. No click, no rewind, just silence. Owen stared at the recorder, heart pounding like war drums. The voice had ended mid-thought, or maybe mid-transformation, and now he wasn't sure if Vale was warning him, or welcoming him home. The desert gave up its secrets like confessions, slowly, and only after enough blood had been spilled. It was dawn when Owen found it, just outside the spiral canyon, beneath a fragile crust of salt and sand. The spade hit something that wasn't rock. A hollow clack, bone, dry and old. He dropped to his knees. It wasn't like the first body. This one was arranged, not collapsed, not scattered, placed. The skeleton was curled into a fetal position, arms wrapped around its legs, as if clinging to something that no longer existed. Around its neck, a rusted chain, empty where an ID tag might once have hung, and beneath it, carved into the packed earth in a perfect ring around the bones, was the spiral, not painted, not natural, scratched with desperate precision. Owen's breath fogged in the cold morning air despite the rising heat. His hands shook as he brushed more sand away from the skull. It wasn't Vale. He was sure of that. The bone structure was different, slighter, more narrow. Female, most likely. But something about the positioning, the chain, the spiral, it felt intentional, ritualistic. Not murder, not accident. Burial. And whoever had done it had known what the spiral meant. He pulled back, trying to stay logical, methodical. But the thoughts came anyway. Vale wasn't alone. Someone else had followed the path. Or maybe she had led more than one man into the spiral. Owen sat back on his heels and tried to calm the tremor in his chest. This wasn't just a disappearance. This was a pattern, a ritual. The cave etchings, the myth of the man without shadow, the symbols that matched no culture, and yet echoed all of them. And now, 2 bodies. One lost, one buried like an offering. Owen whispered into the wind, half a prayer, half a challenge. Who were you? The wind didn't answer, but the sand shifted at the edge of the spiral, as if something beneath it had stirred, watching, waiting, and very much aware that he was next. Owen sat cross-legged around the fire, the desert night stretching infinitely above him like a black ocean dotted with cold stars. Across the flames, an old Tuareg man named Iman spoke quietly, his voice gravelly with age and dust. Out here, Iman began, we tell stories to keep the desert alive, to honor what it takes, to warn those who come with empty hearts. Owen leaned in, the flickering light casting deep shadows across the man's weathered face. There are those we call the sun ghosts, travelers who vanish beneath the heat, swallowed by the endless sands, not dead, never dead, but lost. They wander. Wander? Owen asked. Iman's eyes darkened, not as men walk, but as whispers. Seen at dawn, when the sky is still cool, a figure in white, moving without sound, sometimes close enough to touch. But when you reach out, they dissolve like mist. He paused, letting the crackling fire fill the silence. These ghosts carry stories, unfinished journeys, broken promises, secrets too heavy for the earth. They are trapped between the world of men and the desert's endless hunger. Owen swallowed hard, picturing the woman in the veil from Vale's vision. Is there a way for them to rest? He asked. Iman's face tightened. Only if the desert remembers their names. Only if someone buries their story beneath the sand. The fire flared, casting long, jittering shadows across the tribe's circle. The desert wind sighed outside their camp, carrying with it an almost imperceptible whisper. Owen felt a chill deep in his bones. The spiral, the skeletons, the warnings. This was no ordinary disappearance. This was a curse, and the desert was still hungry. The desert heat had burned away the sky's color to a washed-out pale blue when Owen spotted it, an almost invisible line breaking the dunes. A jagged crack, partially hidden by blown sand and a scattered tangle of thorn bush. He crouched, brushing sand aside until his fingers found the cold, rough edge of concrete. Not natural, not ancient, something different, a forgotten entrance. He pulled at the rusted latch. It gave with a dry groan. Inside, the air was heavy and still, but cooler. Darkness swallowed the tunnel, but his flashlight caught the walls, scrawled words layered over decades of peeling paint and grime. Most graffiti was faded, the usual names and dates of bored soldiers long gone. But one phrase, written in thick black spray paint, struck him like a hammer. I was never Thomas Vale. Owen's pulse quickened. The handwriting was jagged, desperate. Who had written it? Vale himself? Or someone else trapped in this underground maze of memories? The words echoed off the concrete with haunting finality. Identity, fractured and lost in the shifting sands of time. He moved deeper, following the narrow corridors lined with rusting equipment and crumbling maps. Somewhere, the faint drip of water echoed, like the slow beat of a fractured heart. This place wasn't just a World War II shelter. It was a tomb of secrets, a place where truth was buried beneath layers of lies and silence. Owen pressed a hand to the cold wall, swallowing the lump rising in his throat. If Thomas Vale wasn't Thomas Vale, then who was he? And what had Owen become by chasing shadows in this endless desert? The underground whispered back in silence, an unspoken challenge to uncover the answer before the spiral claimed him too. The cave was narrower here, its walls slick with mineral deposits that shimmered faintly like frozen tears. Owen's headlamp danced over the jagged quartz veins, white streaks slicing through stone, cold and unyielding. And then he saw it, words, scratched deep into the rock, carving scars that glinted faintly in the light. I killed him. Owen's breath caught. The letters weren't neat. They were raw, scratched with the desperation of a man confessing to himself, perhaps for the last time. Beneath that, another line. He was my only friend out here. Owen swallowed. The voice behind the words echoed through the cave like a ghost. Vale's voice. But how? How had this confession been left here, hidden in crystal stone, untouched for years? He traced the words carefully, feeling the weight of guilt seeping from the rock itself. I didn't mean to. The heat, the madness. It was an accident. But I watched him die, and I did nothing. Owen's mind raced. Who was the victim? Another member of the expedition? A local guide? Or someone even closer? The admission fractured the story he thought he knew. Vale wasn't just a lost scientist, he was a man carrying a dark secret, a man haunted by his own hand. I buried him beneath the salt, where no one would find him. But the desert remembers everything. Owen's fingers brushed the quartz wall, feeling a chill that wasn't from the cave's cold. The spiral wasn't just a symbol of madness or myth. It was a circle of consequences, a loop of guilt and silence, and somewhere beneath all the sand and stone, a confession waited to be answered. The journal was yellowed, its edges curled like desert leaves. Owen flipped to a page covered in frantic, looping lines, Vale's handwriting growing wilder by the day. Maps scribbled in margins, spirals inside spirals, paths crossing and doubling back on themselves. Vale had become the cartographer of his own unraveling. He charted the canyon like a mad god mapping an empire of sand and shadows. Each line a thread pulled tighter around his sanity. A note in the margin caught Owen's eye. The spiral is not a place, but a mind. The deeper I go, the less real the world becomes. I am both hunter and prey. Vale's handwriting trembled as he plotted points with obsessive precision, drawing routes that led nowhere, paths folding into themselves like snakes devouring their tails. The margins were filled with frantic equations and symbols, the spirals multiplying until they blurred into chaotic constellations. Owen felt the weight of it, the madness bleeding through the ink. Vale was not just lost in the desert. He was lost inside himself. One drawing showed a jagged line descending into a cavernous abyss, labeled simply, "The Heart of the Spiral." Beneath it, a scrawled question. Will I find the truth or become the myth? Owen's fingers lingered on the page, feeling the pulse of genius intertwined with madness. Vale's mind was a labyrinth, brilliant but deadly. The map was a warning and a confession. The closer you got to the center, the more you risked losing everything. Because in the desert, sometimes the only way to survive is to surrender. And sometimes, the only way to surrender is to disappear. Owen stood hesitantly on the threshold of Elise's modest home, the letter clutched in his hand. Years had carved delicate lines around her eyes, but her gaze was as sharp as ever, guarded yet welcoming. They sat across from each other at a small wooden table, the air thick with unspoken pain. "I never knew he meant for you to find this," Elise whispered, tracing the faded ink on the letter's fragile paper. Owen nodded slowly. "There's more here than words. Vale wasn't just desperate. He was trying to tell us something." Together they pored over the letter again, line by line, word by word, until a pattern emerged. A series of seemingly random letters at the start of certain sentences. Owen's eyes widened. An acrostic, a code. Elise leaned closer, breath shallow, heart pounding. The letters spelled out a name. Mira. "Who's Mira?" Owen asked. Elise's fingers trembled. "My sister. She disappeared in the Sahara years before Vale went missing. I thought she was just another victim of the desert." The room fell silent, the weight of connection binding them both. Vale's message wasn't just a farewell. It was a bridge, linking lost souls across time. Shared grief transformed into shared purpose. Owen felt something ignite inside him, a fierce resolve. "We need to find Mira." Elise nodded, eyes shining with renewed hope. For her, for Thomas, for everyone the desert swallowed. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window panes like a whispered warning. But inside, two broken lives were finding a fragile strength. Together, they would follow the spiral deeper, and finally, face the darkness waiting at its heart. Owen sat hunched over his laptop, the dim glow of the screen casting ghostly shadows on his face. The letter from Elise had set something in motion, a puzzle buried deep beneath layers of sand and time. He stared at the string of numbers he'd decoded from Vale's writings, coordinates that led to a place no official map acknowledged. His fingers trembled as he input them into the satellite imagery software. The screen flickered, and then revealed something impossible. There, amid the endless dunes, was a formation, precise and angular. A cluster of structures that shouldn't exist in this remote, uninhabited stretch of the Sahara. The shapes were sharp, geometric, like ruins from a civilization not recorded by any historian, a labyrinthine complex buried beneath millennia of sand. Owen's heart pounded. Had Vale really stumbled onto something ancient? Something deliberately erased? He zoomed in closer. The structures cast unnatural shadows, some circular, others jagged like shards. The spiral motif repeated in the layout, as if the entire site was designed around it. His breath caught when a sudden movement flickered on the edge of the image, a tiny blur, a dust cloud, something, or someone, moving beneath the scorching sun. Owen leaned back, disbelief crashing through him. Could the desert really be hiding a secret that defied all logic? A lost city? A cult? A geological anomaly? Or worse, a trap? His mind raced. If Vale vanished here, if Mira's story was tied to this place, then the spiral wasn't just a symbol. It was a door, and someone was still standing on the other side, waiting, watching. Owen rewound the tape again, the hiss of static filling the quiet room. Vale's voice emerged, hollow, distant, fractured by time and madness. "If you're listening, I am no longer who I was. I have unburied myself, not from the earth, but from the man I used to be." The words trembled with raw despair. The desert doesn't just take your body. It strips you down to your bones, your soul. I am something else now, something elemental. Part sand, part shadow, a ghost shaped by the spiral's endless turning. Owen's hands clenched the recorder tightly. Vale's voice cracked. "I lost myself chasing a truth too vast for one man to hold. The spiral promised meaning, but all it gave me was oblivion." A sharp breath, A pause weighted with unbearable loneliness. If this is the end of my story, then know this. The desert remembers every step, every secret, every sin, and in the end, it unburies us all. The tape sputtered and faltered, Vale's final words trailing into silence. Owen felt the crushing weight of loss settle deep in his chest. This was no mere disappearance. It was a slow, tragic unraveling. A man lost to a place that refused to let go. Vale hadn't just vanished from the world. He had vanished from himself. The spiral had claimed him, not as victim, but as something else. Something undone. Owen exhaled sharply, the room feeling colder, emptier. He pressed stop, and in the sudden silence he heard the faintest whisper in the air, a sound like wind weaving through stone. The spiral was still turning, and somewhere, somehow, Vale was still out there. The sun was a merciless glare overhead as Owen stepped off the beaten track, the coordinates burning in his mind like a brand. Each step felt heavier, the sand beneath his boots shifting unpredictably, as if resisting his presence. He carried only essentials, a water pack, a notebook, and the tape recorder. But inside, something else weighed him down, a growing sense of crossing a threshold that no man should dare approach. The jagged outline of the spiral complex stretched ahead, surreal and impossible under the endless blue sky. Owen's breath hitched. Here, in this forbidding place, the desert silence roared in his ears. He moved forward, senses sharpened, every grain of sand, every flicker of heat playing tricks on his mind. The spirals etched into the ground glimmered faintly, as though alive. Whispering secrets meant only for those who dared to listen. Time slipped. Minutes bled into hours. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows that twisted like hands reaching out. Then, something shifted. A low hum vibrated through the earth, subtle but insistent, growing louder in his chest than in the air. Owen stumbled to a stop. His vision blurred, the edges of the world softening. The spirals around him seemed to pulse, breathing, expanding. He wanted to record it, to write it down, to scream into the void. But the moment swallowed him whole. Thoughts fragmented, reality dissolved. In that space, between the waking and the lost, Owen vanished. No note, no signal, no trace. Only the desert holding its breath, and the spiral turning silently beneath the stars. 2 weeks later, the desert finally surrendered its newest secret. Owen was found, alone, delirious, skin cracked and scorched, crawling weakly from the shifting dunes like a man born of the sand itself. The search team had stumbled on him near the outer edge of the spiral complex, eyes sunken and glazed, lips cracked with thirst. He was alive, but barely. At the field hospital, as medics worked tirelessly to rehydrate him, Owen's mind was a fractured mirror. Memories came in shards, blinding flashes of heat, whispers of voices, the unrelenting spiral. Then, one detail surfaced, sharp and strange. Etched deeply into the pale flesh of his forearm, a single word scorched like a brand. Remember. He traced the letters with trembling fingers, the pain in his body mirrored by the weight of that command. Remember what? The word echoed inside him, a relentless drumbeat beneath the haze of fever and exhaustion. He was a survivor. But survival came at a cost. Inside, something had broken. The man who had vanished into the desert was not the man who had returned. Fragments of who he was had been lost, stolen by the sun, the sand, the spiral itself. As doctors whispered about trauma and memory loss, Owen lay silent, eyes fixed on the window where the sun dipped behind the horizon. The desert was still calling, and the word on his arm was a promise, or a warning, to remember, to face what he'd found, or to disappear forever. Elise sat alone in the dim light of her living room, the final page of Vale's tattered journal spread before her like a fragile lifeline. Her fingers trembled as she traced the jagged spiral drawn with unsteady ink, an image that wasn't a map of sand or stone, but something far more elusive, a map of a mind unraveling. Each twist and coil echoed the chaos she'd seen in Vale's letters, the spirals folding inward until they disappeared into a dark, empty center. She read aloud the final entry. "The desert's truth is not buried beneath it, but inside me. The spiral is my torment and my prison. Each turn strips away who I was, leaving only shadows to chase the fading light." Tears blurred her vision. She knew that spiral all too well. It was not just Thomas's fate, but a mirror of her own grief and confusion. "I see you now," she whispered into the silence, feeling the weight of years pressing down. Not lost, but trapped, searching for peace. Her heart clenched as she realized the true tragedy. Vale hadn't disappeared into the desert's void. He disappeared inside himself, swallowed by the very spiral he tried to understand. But this final page wasn't just an end. It was a beginning, an invitation to let go of the past, to forgive, to heal. Elise closed the journal gently, a fragile catharsis settling over her like a balm. The desert's whispers might never cease, but now she held the truth. Some spirals are meant to be broken, not followed. And in breaking them, perhaps they could finally find light beyond the shadows. The police file on Thomas Vale's disappearance was officially closed, marked as a cold case, with a neat little notation that the second skeleton, found near the spiral complex, remained unidentified. No leads, no answers, just silence. Owen's name had long faded from the headlines. Elise's pleas were reduced to faint echoes in a world eager to forget. The desert, vast and indifferent, swallowed every trace, every whispered rumor. But the locals still spoke in hushed tones. New stories emerged. Another traveler vanished without a trace. A caravan lost beyond the dunes. Voices carried by the wind in the dead of night. The desert had claimed more. Unseen, relentless. A predator cloaked in shifting sands. Owen's return was remembered only by those who knew the cost, how the desert had fractured him, left him haunted and hollow. And the spiral? It remained, etched deep into the earth and the minds of those who dared to look too closely. A silent reminder that some places don't want to be found, that some secrets aren't meant for daylight. Elise stood at the edge of the Sahara, the sun dipping low, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch into forever. She felt the weight of every lost soul, the unfinished stories, the broken lives. A cold dread settled in her chest. The desert keeps its ghosts, and it's always hungry for more. She turned away, but the wind whispered behind her, a soft, chilling promise that the spiral was far from finished. The story wasn't over. Not yet. Owen sat alone in the dim tent, the tape recorder humming softly beside him. His voice was low, uneven, like a man grasping at shadows. "The desert," he began, pausing to steady his breath, "isn't just a place. It's a mirror. A place where the mind echoes back untrue." He swallowed hard, struggling to find the words that wouldn't slip away like grains of sand. "When I was out there, I saw things, heard voices, felt myself unraveling. But was it real? Or was the desert twisting my mind, reflecting fears I didn't know I had?" He traced the outline of the spiral carved into the dusty floor, fingertips trembling. It's like the desert holds a memory, but it's a memory that lies. A cruel trick played on the senses. You think you're finding truth, but all you get is distortion, reflection without reality. His eyes darkened. "I don't know if I was lost in the sand, or in my own head. Every step forward felt like moving backward. The spiral kept pulling me deeper, but deeper into what? Madness? Truth? Or just an endless loop of fear? A shiver ran through him, his voice barely a whisper. The desert doesn't forgive. It doesn't forget. It just waits, reflecting your darkest parts until you can't tell what's real anymore. He pressed stop, heart pounding. The silence that followed was thick, oppressive. Owen knew one thing for certain. Some mirrors don't show who you are. They show who you fear becoming. And in the desert's cold gaze, he feared he had already crossed that line. The letter was folded neatly, edges softened by time and hidden beneath a false floorboard in Vale's journal. It had never been sent. An unfinished confession left to fade in the shadows. Owen unfolded the fragile paper with reverence, feeling the weight of every word before his eyes even took them in. If you find me, you will lose yourself. The desert does not grant mercy. It demands surrender. It strips you bare, salt from skin, silence from breath. The words whispered like the wind through a desolate canyon, haunting, inevitable. I chased the spiral, thinking it would lead me to truth. Instead, it led me to a place where silence is louder than screams, where time stretches until it breaks. Owen's heart tightened. Vale's despair wasn't just about being lost. It was about what he had become in the vast emptiness. The desert holds no secrets, only reflections. If you listen too closely, you hear your own undoing. You cannot escape it. And if you think you can save me, beware. You might drown in the same saltwater abyss. A tear traced a clean line down Owen's cheek, the raw reality of the letter searing through his mind. Vale's last warning was clear. Some mysteries were not meant to be unraveled. Some spirals were traps. And some disappearances were not accidents. They were sacrifices. Owen folded the letter carefully, a chilling silence settling around him like a shroud. In the vast, merciless desert, to find Thomas Vale was to risk becoming him, lost, broken, vanished beneath the salt and silence. Elise stood alone at the edge of the endless dunes where Thomas Vale had vanished all those years ago. The desert stretched before her, a vast, shimmering expanse, unbroken and merciless, fading into a horizon that seemed to swallow the sun whole. The wind whispered through the dry grass, carrying with it the faintest echoes of a lost past. Voices and footsteps carried away before they could be heard. Her eyes scanned the sands, searching not for answers but for something she didn't quite understand. A sign, a final word, or perhaps forgiveness. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that danced across the dunes, but something was missing here. No shadows, just a vast, empty light that erased everything beneath it. As she took a hesitant step forward, something caught the sunlight, a glint, half buried in the shifting sand. Elise knelt, fingers trembling, brushing away fine grains until a small battered object was revealed. A compass. Its glass cracked, the needle frozen, but unmistakably Vale's. Her breath caught. In that moment, the weight of all the years, the loss, the hope, the spiraling madness, seemed to settle around her like dust. She closed her eyes, letting the silence fill the spaces where words had failed. The desert had taken much, but here, at this shadowless horizon, it also left something behind. A fragile trace, a reminder, that even in the vastest emptiness, something endures. Elise stood slowly, the compass clasped tight in her hand, and with one last glance toward the sun-bleached dunes, she turned away. The spiral had ended. But the story? The story was hers to carry now. The wind rose again, scattering sand like whispered secrets into the fading light. Fade out.